Hello everyone, it's Tuesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. East Asia as a region is seeing a surprisingly low birth rate, and South Korea is suffering the most from a declining population. Its fertility rate, or the number of births a woman has in her lifetime, is the world's lowest at 0.78, breaking its own record of 0.81. Today is UN-designated World Population Day to raise awareness of population issues and the urgency needed to address them. And for today's show, we invite special guests to talk about this urgent demographic issue. We have Professor Woo Hyeyoung from Portland State University. Professor Woo, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for being with us. And we also have David Coleman, a renowned Emeritus Professor from Oxford University. Professor Coleman, hi.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for being with us. Now, Professor Coleman, first question to you. Falling birth rates are a crisis being seen particularly by East Asian countries these days. What is it about this region that has resulted in such low fertility rate?
That's an extraordinarily important question. There is something clearly in common with the East Asian countries. It amounts to a number of factors, an extraordinary emphasis upon work, an extraordinary emphasis upon education, a huge acceleration of economic progress, which hasn't been matched by social progress, it seems to me. There are also other factors which seem to be important. One is the difficulty of living in very crowded cities with quite small apartments, which are very unfriendly to children which have more than one or two, and also some difficulties which are unique to East Asian developed countries, particularly the problem of women's choice in how to have children. At the moment, I understand the registration system makes it very difficult for women who have children outside marriage to obtain the usual privileges and benefits which Korea gives to its children if they're born outside marriage. Now, I'm afraid the blunt fact is that in the rest of the world, in the developed world, unless there are about 1 in 3 births outside marriage, as in northwestern Europe, or even more than that, the birth rate will be very low. And I think until Korea relaxes somewhat its strict attitude towards birth in marriage, that births will remain low, and that's one of the several reasons why you have a problem.
Right, I see. Now, South Korea is actually no exception regarding this trend. And Professor Coleman, its total fertility rate hit a record low of 0.78 in 2022, like I said before. And I remember that you have even mentioned that South Korea will be at risk of national extinction by 2750. How serious is this figure?
That figure wasn't invented by me. It came from Korean official and national research. And it's very extreme thing that things are going to be in 700 years' time as they are now. And after all, back to Korea 700 years ago, it was then before the Joseon came into it. To imagine what Korea and what Seoul would be at the present time. And so for the same reason, we can't possibly imagine what Korea will be like in 700 years' time. I have no doubt that this problem will be resolved. This is just an extreme early warning to say that something has to be done.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Woo, there are many reasons for this low fertility rate, at some point to Confucianism and some to credentialism that makes people prioritize other things than marriage and giving birth. What do you believe is the main reason?
Yes. So, like persistent traditional gender role expectations in Korea, where personal education and work among women are not going well together for this, record low fertility rate. However, I think that, it requires some cautions to talk about how Confucianism and also what credentialism might be responsible for the continuously declining fertility, because it's not that people don't value family, and it's not that people are selfish to put their work before family and children. And in fact, I believe that it's quite the opposite. So many people would still like to have a family and raise children, yet getting married and having children in a way that they would like to have just don't seem very feasible for many young people these days due to unequal divisions in housework and like child rearing between men and women within family and such long hours at work.
Right, I totally agree. Now, Professor Coleman, let's tap on issues we need to face one by one that could be caused by shrinking population. Now, a dwindling working age population could be one of the issues, and some reports say the country's GDP is also going to fall. Now, what economic impact is this low fertility rate going to have?
Is that just Professor Woo? Well, I will answer. The problem is not GDP as such. GDP is a function of population. Of course, population, GDP, what matters is GDP. That is a factor of individual wealth and well-being. Of course, the workforce will shrink, but so will the workforce if the whole population and the economy is shrinking. It's one of the numerous problems which Korea or other population is declining cases. In a slow fashion, in a gentle fashion, population is probably inevitable for most of the countries in the world. It's already in East Europe. It's happening in parts of the world as well. It'll happen in parts. As long as low and control may not be Korea present birth. That it's managed, but it is a lot you have to get used to and make accommodations, including, for example, spreading even further the automation of production of goods and services, that which we have at the moment, in order to replace the missing workload.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Woo, there are also issues with the shrinking number of childcare facilities and pediatric services. Now, what issues are children already facing, and what further social impact is this low fertility rate going to have?
Oh, yeah, true. So in addition to the declining numbers of child care facility and pediatric services, so it directly just affects the quality of the life and the overall health of our future generation too. And then also the future of public schools and educators is not very bright. But what I'm more worried about is that we might not have as much diversity. So without having many kids around, many people may feel less responsible about raising our future generations. And instead, they might find like little kids like loud and annoying, and then so they might not be able to relate themselves to like our future of the society here. So similarly, as we face the fastest aging population in Korea compared to all other countries, some may feel like overwhelmed or burdened when thinking about our older generation or our parental generations too. So these tendencies about less accepting like those who are not like themselves might just increase intergenerational conflict and then feeling less about our society as a whole to protect and support all the people in the society.
Right, I see. I mean, having this kind of no-kid zone in South Korea clearly shows such kind of a trend that our Professor Woo talked about. Now, Professor Woo, I'd like to ask you this. South Korea, put a lot of efforts to solve this problem, and it also spent more than $200 billion to boost the population over the past 16 years. But apparently, nothing has worked properly. Why do you believe this is?
So, I think, bottom line is that, we need to, I like to really kind of emphasize the importance of like our work culture and then also what the culture, like raising the family here too. So Korea, so I understand that, like you said, I totally agree that we have spent a lot of money and then local government always come up with like new things, new policies, but some of them are not necessarily getting at the bottom of the issue here, because I was saying earlier, so it's not that, people don't like kids. It's not that they don't want to get married. Instead, they would like to have those things, and yet it's not just like very like realistic option for them to live a life. So in order to kind of tackle those things, I think it's really important for us to kind of think about like how we can actually change the work culture. And, Korea is very well known for like overwork culture and then the longest work hour compared to all other countries. So that's one thing. So maybe we can kind of think about reduce like work hours, and then work arrangement gotta be really also flexible here too. So we also have a really good like, the paid family leave as well, but then how it has been kind of utilized, that's also another question here too. So instead of having, instead of thinking about like women as a primary responsible people to raise the kids, we need to think about how we can actually like raise the kids in a society in a way that it's sustainable for both like fathers and mothers, for both parents.
Right, I cannot agree more. Now, Professor Woo, one more question here. Many politicians, including Seoul Mayor Oh Se-eun, are actually suggesting immigration as a key to fixing the nation's exceptionally low birth rate. But how do you see this? Could this be a feasible, solution to solve this problem?
I'm afraid it might not. So, the kid or making arrangement for the kids, it's one thing, but then we should be able to make in a way the parents can actually step in so that they can actually spend some time together with their kids. So that's what I was kind of thinking about, maybe making the work culture so that we can have some of the flexible hours and reduced hours. And also if we are going to have this like family leave policy, then we should really encourage for fathers as well as mothers to take advantage of those things, because currently, the utilization of the paid family leave has been it has been increasing, but then mostly it is for mothers. And then, that issue is not really helping the fundamental issue of the low fertility issue here too.
Right, so immigration cannot be the solution to all the problems that our Professor Woo talked about. Now, Professor Woo, experts say South Korea should achieve full gender equality as well to tackle this low fertility rate issue. In what way is South Korea seeing gender inequality, and how is it impacting the low birth rate, and how should it be tackled?
So, yeah, we all know that Korea is really well known for the lowest level of gender equality among all the industrialized countries. But then, there are a lot of like different items to think about to measure like how we can actually think about gender inequality and gender equality. But then in Korea, one of the measure of the gender equality or gender inequality is the educational attainments for women. But then if you look at the educational attainments, the trends in Korea, women's education is pretty high. So we are doing pretty good there. But then if we think about how they actually enter the labor force and then develop the career, and it's a totally different issue there too. And one of the big reasons there in Korea is that so many people seem to think that, raising children is primarily like women's job and mother's responsibility. So that has to be changed. That has to change. So in order to change those things, we need to really kind of think about like raising kids is our like society's like responsibility. So I think there are like long-term policies and then short-term policy, and then there are different things that we should do, because, the trends of low fertility or declining fertility in Korea, it has been like this since the 1980s. And then, it having like this pattern, this trend turning around, it's not going to happen overnight. So we need to really kind of come up with like several different policies at multiple different levels. And then, some of the things we can actually do relatively in a short-term period. And then some of the things we got to kind of think about in a long term. So some of the cash benefit might not be really effective way of like, having this low fertility or declining fertility turning around. But then instead, we got to think about how we can actually change the way that we think about the family, the way we think about raise the children, and also the way that we work in a sustainable way so that we can actually work and also raise family, and then in a way that we can see ourselves happy.
Right, I cannot agree more that certain perspective on women's role should change. Now, Professor Coleman, we have been until now talking about what South Korea should do more to tackle this low fertility rate issue. And I'd like to ask you also on this immigration being considered as a key to fixing the nation's exceptionally low birth rate. What is your opinion on this immigration?
Well, it's a very tempting solution, I suppose, but it's not really a solution because the fundamental problem is not one of a lack of migrants, it's of a lack of children. Now, in the short run, and as an immediate an attempt to stop the gap, of course you can import more people, and that would solve the problem in the short run. But it wouldn't solve the problem in the long run because it wouldn't do anything to increase the birth rate. It was slowly change Korean society away from being Korean, inevitably. And also, the problem with this approach to things is that if you want to preserve the age structure, the ratio of younger people to older ones by immigration, then you need increasingly large numbers of migrants, eventually becoming, in the long run, astronomical. You'll remember the extraordinary projection made by the United Nations back in 1990, which showed that you would have thousands of millions of people that would have to come to Korea eventually in order to preserve the age structure of the population as it was in around the year 2000. This won't do. So you really got to address the main problem to do with marriage and birth. And use migration only as a temporary measure with great caution.
Right, so migration is only a temporary measure. In that case, Professor Coleman, sometimes we need to take a look at other countries' examples, for great references. And it seems like European nations seems like to be seeing a higher birth rate compared to East Asian countries. And that being said, what specific countries could we take a look at? And what are these countries doing that made that possible? And what ideas could South Korea take from those countries?
The countries which are perhaps the ones which you have in mind are the countries of Northern Europe, the Scandinavian countries, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and to some extent Britain, but also France, especially France. France has the enormous advantage of having a very reliable population policy, very reliable family welfare measures which support the family and which the French population trust to support the family. The French know that perfectly well that whoever is the president in the Élysée Palace, whoever wins the election, whether it's socialists or Gaullists or anybody else, that the family welfare policies will be sustained, that numerous families will be supported, and this policy will be unchanged. That consistency is terribly important when children are such a long-term investment. You can't send them back once you've got them. That's important. And the other aspect of things, which France is also good at, is the issue of gender equity, which I think has been discussed already by Professor Woo. And the importance of making married life attractive, the importance of men taking their share of things when women are behaving more like men insofar as they are becoming as well as or better educated than men, when they take important positions in all walks of society and have careers. If women are in that respect are behaving more like men, then it's essential that men have to behave more like women. And as a colleague of mine keeps on saying, if you look after the interests of women and let them do what they want, then population will look after itself.
Right, I see. So France's case could give a great reference to South Korea. Now, Professor Coleman, I'd like to also ask you about this. Now, we already know that South Korea has put a lot of money, around $200 billion to boost this population over a decade. Now, but nothing has worked properly, right? In what direction do you believe should government's measures go? What's your opinion?
it's very difficult for an ignorant outsider like me to suggest what the Korean government or the Korean people ought to do. I'm very reluctant to try and lay down the law on these matters. It's for Korea to decide. But if you do ask my opinion, then I would say that while financial support is very important, as has been shown in France and Scandinavia, the measures which I mentioned do cost money. Nonetheless, the solution is not primarily a financial or an economic one. It's to do with culture. It's to do with recognizing the equality of the sexes. It's by allowing women to do things their way. I suggested earlier on a big problem arises because of the difficulties which women have in choosing which way to have their children. That it has to be within marriage. Marriage is unattractive, it seems, for a variety of reasons. Not only must marriage be made much more attractive from the point of view of men providing a bigger share of the care of the house and the care of children, and possibly being more at home than in the past. But also there must be some more flexibility in the terms in which women can produce children. There should be equality in terms of the registration of birth and the entitlement of babies to the privileges of belonging to Korean society. That's the direction, as I think Professor Woo was saying, in which travel has to be made, not by throwing even more money at the problem. It's not primarily a money problem.
Right, I see. So money is not the problem. It seems like a change in perspective, change in our point of view should be necessary. Now, Professor Woo, very briefly, I'd like to also listen to your opinion as well. What are your suggestions on how South Korea should go to tackle this issue?
Well, so yeah, I'm gonna be very brief, but I wanted to just emphasize what Professor Coleman was also saying too. So Korea, we can use the Northern European countries' case, but then at the same time, I mean, Korea is also very unique in that a lot of people who are getting married and then they also tend to have kids. So in other words, the link between getting married and having kids is pretty strong. So that means, like he was suggesting, I think it's important to kind of think about how we can actually encourage people to get married here too. So, so there are a lot of benefits, but then at the same time, we can also provide from the society, like a lot of benefits for those young people when they get married. So that's one thing. And then once they get married, and then they gotta be also, and also they gotta, so the society should encourage or support for those married people when they decide to have kids too. So like I was saying earlier, so changing the culture and the policy around workplace, that's one thing. And also I think we can also think about a lot of things that society can offer for married couples.
Right, I see.
And also non-married couples who would like to have kids.
Right, I see. I cannot agree more. Now, I'd like to ask many more questions to our experts, but unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Professor Coleman and Professor Woo, for your insights. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.